confirming that captive women understood the sexual exploitation that accompanied enslavement. The Christian martyr accounts from the 2nd and 3rd centuries provide additional glimpses into how Roman systems of sexual exploitation operated within arena contexts. The Passion of Perpetua and Felicitas describes how Christian women condemned to the arena in 203 CE. Carthage were given nets to cover their nakedness before being sent to face animals, suggesting that public exposure of condemned women's bodies was standard practice. While these martyrs faced execution rather than survival as captives, their treatment illustrates the routine sexualized humiliation inflicted on women within arena spaces. The infrastructure that supported this exploitation required coordination across multiple Roman institutions, military commanders who captured and transported prisoners, slave traders who processed and distributed them, arena officials who maintained holding facilities and organized spectacles, legal authorities who created frameworks that stripped captives of all protections, and the Roman public whose appetite for spectacle created economic demand for fresh supplies of exotic prisoners. The system was not incidental to Roman civilization, but fundamental to how the empire maintained dominance over conquered territories, through demonstrating that defeat meant total loss of dignity, autonomy, and humanity. Modern archaeological investigations have revealed aspects of arena infrastructure that support these historical accounts, while raising questions about practices that sources describe vaguely or omit entirely. Excavations beneath the Colosseum, conducted systematically since the 19th century, have documented the complexity of the hypogeum system, dozens of holding cells of various sizes, mechanical elevators capable of lifting animals and humans to arena level, corridors connecting different sections, and water systems for managing waste and maintaining the facility. Some chambers show evidence of extended occupation graffiti scratched into walls, worn floor stones, modifications to ventilation systems, suggesting prisoners were held there for extended periods rather than just hours before being sent to the arena. What archaeology cannot definitively prove is the function of every chamber. Some spaces are clearly identifiable animal cages, show reinforced doors and drainage for waste. Gladiator preparation areas contain armor, storage, and weapon racks. Corridors for moving condemned prisoners show heavy security features, but other chambers within the complex, particularly smaller rooms with iron ring mounts in walls and floors, have ambiguous purposes that could include various forms of detention, punishment, or exploitation. The absence of clear archaeological markers for sexual violence, which typically leaves no physical trace, means we must rely on the fragmentary written sources and the logic of Roman legal and social systems to understand what likely occurred in these spaces. The eventual decline of gladiatorial combat in the 4th and 5th centuries CE came not from moral awakening about the exploitation of captives, but from Christianity's growing influence and the empire's weakening military position that reduced the supply of prisoners available for arena spectacles. The last recorded gladiatorial games occurred in 404 CE, when Emperor Honorius banned them following a riot in Rome. Though the exploitation of enslaved women throughout the empire continued under different pretexts for centuries, the legal designation of war captives as rightless property persisted in various forms through medieval European law and into the early modern period, demonstrating that Rome's frameworks for justifying exploitation of conquered peoples had lasting influence far beyond the empire's political collapse. The historical scholarship on this topic remains contentious because the sources are fragmentary and often maddeningly vague, precisely at the points where we most want clarity about what happened to captive women in arena contexts. Roman authors who were comfortable describing graphic battlefield violence or gladiatorial combat in detail became notably circumspect when discussing sexual exploitation, using euphemisms like suffered the fate of captives or were used according to custom without specifying what those customs entailed. This selective silence suggests that even Romans who accepted slavery and military conquest as normal found certain arena-related practices shameful enough to avoid explicit description. Modern historians must therefore reconstruct these practices from indirect evidence, legal codes that address disputes over captive women's status, satirical literature that mocks Romans who pursued sexual encounters in arena contexts, martyr accounts that describe the sexualized humiliation of Christian prisoners, archaeological evidence of holding facilities, and the fundamental logic of Roman systems that treated enslaved women as property available for any use their owners desired. The cumulative evidence strongly supports that systematic sexual exploitation occurred, though the specific mechanisms and frequencies remain debated. One point of scholarly consensus: the Roman arena system was designed to dehumanize all participants, prisoners, gladiators, animals, even the free Roman poor who depended on distributions of grain and entertainment to survive. The architectural structure of amphitheaters literally elevated wealthy spectators above the violence while forcing the condemned and enslaved into underground spaces where they became interchangeable units of entertainment value. This physical arrangement mirrored and reinforced social hierarchies where conquered peoples existed solely to be consumed, whether through death in combat, labor until exhaustion, or sexual exploitation for the benefit of Roman citizens whose prosperity depended on empire's continuous extraction of resources and bodies from subjected territories. The women who survived Roman captivity and exploitation rarely left records in their own voices. What we know of their experiences comes filtered through Roman authors who viewed them as objects rather than subjects, or through Christian writers who instrumentalized their suffering as evidence of Roman paganism's depravity rather than documenting the women's humanity. The rare exceptions, such as Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, who was captured in 274 CE and paraded in Aurelian's triumph before being allowed to live in comfortable exile at Tibur, represent unusual cases where high status and political rested and summonse of milence in a member calculation produced outcomes different from the standard fate of captive women whose names and stories were never recorded. For the thousands of unnamed women transported to Rome from Dacia, Judea, Britannia, Germania, and countless other conquered territories. Slavery in its various forms, domestic servitude, agricultural labor, prostitution, or availability for sexual exploitation within gladiatorial and arena contexts constituted a life sentence that often proved shorter than the natural lifespan due to overwork, disease, suicide, or violence. The children born from their exploitation automatically inherited enslaved status, creating generational cycles of bondage that perpetuated conquest's demographic impact long after military campaigns concluded. Modern genetic studies of populations descended from Roman territories show evidence of this forced migration and reproduction, with maternal lineages often differing significantly from paternal lineages in ways that reflect systematic sexual exploitation of conquered women by Roman men. The Colosseum stands today as Rome's most recognizable monument, visited by millions of tourists annually who marvel at its engineering sophistication and imagine gladiatorial combat through the sanitized lens of popular entertainment. Few visitors know that beneath the restored arena floor lie the actual stone chambers where captive women waited in darkness. Or that the mechanisms that lifted animals and condemned prisoners to the arena's surface were part of an industrial system for processing human beings into spectacle and profit. The historical truth is uncomfortable, but necessary. Rome's greatest architectural achievements, its legal innovations that influenced all subsequent Western law, its literature and philosophy that remain foundational to modern education, and its military conquests that shaped European geography coexisted with systematic brutality toward the powerless that extended far beyond battlefield necessity into entertainment, profit, and the routine exploitation of human vulnerability. The empire did not see contradiction between these elements. Violence and exploitation were understood as natural consequences of conquest, legally justified and socially normalized to the point that only the most egregious excesses occasionally prompted debate. Understanding this history matters because the mechanisms Rome developed for dehumanizing conquered people's legal frameworks that stripped captives of rights, economic systems that profited from their exploitation, architectural designs that processed them efficiently, and social narratives that justified their suffering as natural or deserved have appeared repeatedly in subsequent centuries whenever powerful societies have subjugated weaker ones. The specific practices may change, but the underlying logic remains recognizable, defining certain groups as less than human, creating legal and social structures that enable their exploitation, and developing cultural narratives that allow the powerful to maintain psychological comfort despite participating in or benefiting from systematic cruelty. The captive women who passed through Rome's arenas left almost no trace in the historical record beyond occasional mentions in sources focused elsewhere. We don't know their names, their thoughts, their strategies for psychological survival, or how many existed across the empire's centuries. What we know is the system that consumed them documented in law codes, visible in archaeological remains, described obliquely in historical sources, and confirmed by the genetic legacy of systematic sexual exploitation that modern science can detect in populations descended from Roman territories. Subscribe to Medieval Survival Skills for more documented historical reality about how empires weaponize human vulnerability. We're revealing what actually happened behind civilization's monuments.